Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you for joining us this Friday. There is a lot to cover in the fight against COVID. We're going to speak to a congressman in the hard-hit New York district. Also, we will get into the push to reopen the country and the debate as to when is the right time and also the push for mail-in voting. But first, we get the latest news as we approach and pass some very grim numbers. And for that, we turn to our own Andrew Whitman.
And Rich, President Trump today praised the notion that the U.S. could see only 60,000 deaths from COVID-19. That's down from some earlier projections. And new projections now say that today may be the nation's single deadliest day. But there are more numbers still going up than going down tonight. Here's the global view as the worldwide number of cases passed the 1.6 million mark today. This as the curve of new global cases continues. A few days ago, it appeared to be leveling off. It is rising again. The global death toll now more than 101,000 people. Here's the U.S. caseload as areas of concern begin to shift away from New York and into other metro areas. We may well pass 500,000 infected Americans by the time this Friday is over. The national curve is also continuing to climb. So is the fatality count, now more than 18,000 Americans dead. New York's new case curve is also rising. In fact, the state saw the single biggest daily total of new cases thus far, but Governor Cuomo says the overall curve may be lower than first anticipated. And some New York numbers did drop, including deaths and patients in ICU units. And the state's overall number of needed ventilators may end up being less than originally projected. Three more images, and all of this as experts begin to agree that because of limited testing and skipping tests on a wide group, including those who have died outside of hospitals, the entire nation may be dramatically undercounting the total number of COVID deaths. Three more images to share with you. Think of them as headlines behind today's headlines, if you will. The first are images from a food bank in San Antonio yesterday. 10,000 people lined up in cars, many waiting for hours, some there before dawn seeking food assistance. Each car was given 200 pounds of food, single busiest day in the history of the San Antonio food bank. Number two, grim images of mass graves being dug off Hart Island, which is off the coast of the Bronx in New York City. The island is home to the city's Potter's Field, where bodies have been buried for decades once no one comes forward to claim them. Now the island is being prepared for coronavirus victims. The hope is that those bodies are only there temporarily. Finally, the racial disparity of the virus. Black and Latino communities are seeing higher rates of contagion and significantly higher mortality rates from the virus than mostly white neighborhoods do, especially in New Orleans and in New York City. Rich?
Andrew, thank you very much. Now, those grim New York City stories become the everyday focus of our first guest, Congressman Adriano Espaillat. He represents New York's 13th congressional district, that is northern Manhattan, but not the Manhattan many from around the country may be thinking of. His district is majority minority. It includes Harlem, Spanish Harlem, Washington Heights, among other areas. Congressman, I wish you a good Friday here, and we are in surreal times, that's for sure. A lot to get to. First off, just curious, you must see the same thing we do. Every day as a New Yorker, you'll see Governor Cuomo's address, and then a few hours later in the afternoon, you'll hear from the president, and it's as if, I don't know how to compare the two, but you're getting information, facts. It might be hard in the morning, and then the afternoon, you don't know what's true, what's not. You're getting medicine that's being pushed that the CDC even isn't getting behind. You're seeing grievances. How does somebody who goes to Washington who's got to deal with the federal government but also deal with the state reconcile the two?
Well, I mean, thank God for Governor Cuomo, first and foremost. I mean, I think that he has been hands-on, and we hear from him every day, and he's been a good steward of the ship during this unprecedented crisis. You know, we in the federal government must do more. We must do more for hospitals. We must do more for the workers, the healthcare workers. We saw yesterday how hundreds of healthcare workers protested because they feel that they're not getting the protective equipment, not the nurses and doctors per se, but the folks that are there pushing the patients around, the folks that are working in the hospitals, you know, which are bursting through the seams right now. They feel that they're in a very risky situation. So we must do more for them. We've seen in the last 3 days, very high numbers of deaths. They seem to be disproportionately affecting communities of color. 38% are Latinos, 28%, 34% are Latinos, 28% are African Americans. And then, of course, there is the economic crisis that's looming above us. And of course, we must do more there. We see how SBA and their process was a total disaster as of Friday. You know, small businesses have been not been able to access those loans, those forgivable loans. I think this has the makeup of perhaps another sort of like big bailout for big businesses and not Main Street. We must bail out Main Street, and that means that we got to go back to Washington and give them grants. Let's not saddle them with loans after they've been shut down for 3, 4, 5 months. They will never be able to open their doors when they've been shut down for several months if they have a loan on their shoulders. Let's give them grants, inject some dollars into the local economies. Let's get those checks out to people, not just one-shot deals, but recurring checks so that people will have money in their pockets, will be able to buy groceries, will be able to make their rent. So we got to do more for people on the ground. And those communities has been disproportionately hurt, like my district, which has been the center of the epicenter, Queens, the Bronx has been hammered by this pandemic, and we must do much more for them.
So give me an idea, Congressman, about what keeps you up at night. Not today, maybe even not next week, but I'm with you that the SBA rollout, trying to get even unemployment, has been a disaster, okay? What happens a week or two from now, the calls you're already getting in your office where people keep looking in the mailbox for that check that isn't going to be there yet? How are people going to cover the nut between now and then?
That's a real problem. We got a $10 million grant from New York Presbyterian, which, by the way, in the middle of this crisis, as they were dealing with people in ventilators and intubated, they were generous enough to dig into their pocket. I think the other deep pocket institutions, we're watching what they will do during this time for communities across the country. They got to dig into their pockets and help out. And so they helped out. And in just 2 weeks, we sent about 230 applicants for those grants. That's the kind of program that we need nationally. I think that the SBA was cumbersome to begin with. It's not really geared towards small businesses. It's funny because if you have 499 employees, that's not the mom and pop store. That's not the bodega in my corner. That's not the local beauty salon down the street, which, by the way, are the biggest employers of our economy, the small businesses, those that have 10 employees, 5 employees. How do they get help? And right now, SBA is not doing the job. They're not providing that rail, that avenue for access to dollars. So they're failing miserably.
Explain this one to me and our audience. You guys fast track by Washington standards. You get $2.2 trillion to get out. Now the president turns around, he fires the inspector general, who's no partisan guy, just to make sure that the right people are getting and the wrong people aren't getting their hands on this. Should we have any confidence that anybody's making sure that some cronies that have administration, inside influence aren't getting rewarded when it really should be those small businesses you're talking about? And also, for future funding, are you guys going to make sure that it's conditional, that there has to be oversight? I mean, why should we have any confidence our tax dollars are being used the right way, the way it's set up now?
Yeah, oversight is critical. We made sure that no member of Congress, no senator, no congressional member would benefit from the previous stimulus package. We also included language in the last bill to ensure that the airline industry, for example, which got bailed out, would not go ahead and then file bankruptcy and leave their workers out on the street. That's the kind of oversight that we got to have. We cannot continue to make these mistakes where it's too big to fail, and therefore you go ahead and you throw them a lifeline with no conditions, no oversight, no transparency whatsoever. But I think there needs to be a formula also that considers strongly how the pandemic impacted different regions and different cities across the country. In other words, New York must get more. Yes, we must get more. We've been hammered. I cannot tell you how in the Bronx and in Washington Heights and in Harlem, the Harlem parts of my district, folks, I hear of folks that are intubated, that are in the hospital, that are fighting for their lives. Latino males over 55, African American males over 55 with diabetes, with high blood pressure. They're intubated, they're on ventilators, fighting for their lives right now as we speak. The businesses are going to be decimated. The arts community also going to be decimated in these neighborhoods. And so the help must come here.
Last question, Congressman. I'm sure you've heard far too many stories and have had far too many people that you've known that have been impacted by this. But share with my audience one story that has particularly stayed with you since this pandemic's hit your district.
I tell you this, the number of people that I know that have been that tested positive, the people that have lost their lives. My hat goes out to the healthcare workers. They are today's heroes and will ever be, for me, have a special place in my heart.
Congressman, thank you very much for the time. Stay safe. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
When we come back on RFL, the ill-advised push to reopen the nation. More on that after this.